Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today our subject is contemporary issues and trends in education. It is lecture number 19 and today our topic is expanding learning resources. The outlines of lectures are learning, then resources, then learning resources, and then utilization of learning resources and principles of learning resources and utilization. So we will discuss on these 5 topics in this lecture, inshallah. First of all, we see that what is meant by learning. Remember that teaching, learning and assessment, these are the aspects of curriculum for which lecturers take responsibility. Teaching can be defined as an engagement with learners to enable their understanding and application of knowledge, concepts and processes. It includes design, content selection, delivery, assessment and reflection. So learning is an active process of appropriation of knowledge, abilities and skills in order to enhance the personal and collective control potential of shaping reality in a given context or solution. Effective teacher learning and professional development is important for students' achievement. Teacher learning is a continuous process that promotes teachers' teaching skills, master new knowledge, develop new proficiency, which in turn help improve students' learning. So we can say that it is a process of bringing changes in behavior of the learner through experience, and it results in the acquisition of knowledge, skills, interests, attitudes, etc. So we get 90% through teaching others and 75% for by practicing something, and then 50% we get through discussion, and 30% we get from demonstration, and 20% from audiovisual and 10% from reading. Now, resources. What is meant by resources? Materials are those materials that are used for teaching a course, assignments, activities or lesson plan designed to enable students to learn skills and knowledge. So the resources are textbooks, software, relevant reading material, videos, recording, etc. So a source is a source from which benefit is produced, and it is acquired to accomplish activity or to achieve desired outcomes. So individuals who are different from each other in terms of maturity, motivation, ability, learning styles, aspirations, interest, aptitudes and socio-economic background. So the purpose of learning and teaching resources is to provide a source of learning experiences for students. So resources need to be clearly curriculum relevant to be most useful, and all should be framed in the wider context of subject. Connections should be exploited. It should be clear how a resource built on is built on by and links to other. What is meant by learning resources? Learning resources materials are materials that are used for teaching a course, assignments, activities or lesson plans designed to enable students to learn skills and knowledge. We have studied that different learning resources are textbooks, softwares, relevant reading materials, video and recordings. So learning resources are those devices and procedures that helps to make teaching and learning more interesting, more stimulating, more reinforcing and more effective. So learning materials are important because they can significantly increase student achievement by supporting students' learning. For example, Our worksheet may provide a student with important opportunities to practice a new skill gained in class. Then, utilization of learning resources. How can we utilize the learning resources? Remember that individuals who are different from each other in terms of maturity, motivation, ability, learning style, aspirations, interest, aptitudes, and socioeconomic backgrounds. So, the resources are very useful as supporting tools in teaching and learning by giving students the flexibility to access files and materials without the supervision of an instructor in a more informal way, such as browsing the organization's virtual learning environment, whether at school or away. So, teaching learning materials are important for the teachers in teaching his or her lessons effectively, as it help or him or her to a better interpretation and appreciation of the concepts, contents, as well as the subject matter. So, there are some utilization, that whenever you are utilizing some learning resources, then there should be some clarity, then there should be some attentions and interest, then there should be a best motivators, then use of maximum senses based on maxims of teachings, and saving time and efforts, encourages participation and introducing varieties, development of scientific approach, and promotion of international understanding, and then meeting the individual differences. Now, there are some principles of learning resources. Here you can see that there are two main principles: principle of selection and principle of utilization. So, there are some principles of learning sources, like encourage contact between students and faculty, develop reciprocity and cooperation among students, and encourage active learning, give prompt feedback, emphasize time on task, and communicate high expectations, and respect diverse talents and way of learning. Moreover, where the principles are concerned, the provision and development of learning resources by the university will be driven by the need to support the achievement of the strategic objectives set out in the university's strategic plan and its education and postgraduate strategies. Learning resources will be managed to ensure that all students are appropriately supported in undertaking their programs of study, and staff are provided with the necessary resources to deliver these programs. Academic staff and students, through appropriate representations, will be consulted on the management and enhancement of the learning resources. So, those responsible for managing learning resources will establish suitable mechanisms to support such consultations, and will actively reflect upon and use this feedback alongside their own professional expertise and judgment to ensure that the provision of learning resources is appropriate to current pedagogical practices and educational priorities, and is responsive to new priorities and pedagogical development. The university will foster and disseminate good and innovative practice in the use of learning resources for the purposes of learning and teaching. And the provision and enhancement of learning sources will take into account user educational needs, the separate need of undergraduate, taught, postgraduate, and research students and staff will be taken into consideration. The provision of learning resources and ensuring appropriate access to learning resources for all students groups, and anticipating the needs of disabled students. Then we come to the principles of selection. So there are four principles: that the work and evolution, variation, inheritance, selection, and time. So these are considered in the components of the evolutionary mechanism of natural selections. Appropriate and wise selection of learning sources are required from teacher side, as these resources are helpful for achieving teaching objectives. To provide book according to the anticipating demands of potential readers, to avoid selection of obsolete and outdated books, those have no demand at all. To select great works of literature and some books of permanent value, whether they are not in demand. So the other maybe to maintain impartiality, discarding special hobbies or opinion. So principles are fundamental truths that are permanent, unchanging, and universal in nature. For example, Stephen Covey describes the principle as the natural law, like gravity. If you drop something, gravity controls. If I don't tell you the truth, you won't trust me. That is the natural law. So, principle that helps to select learning resources, like the first of the principles of learning centeredness. Learning resources should suit age, maturity, intellectual level, motives, social environment of the learners. Before proceeding here, I would explain that learning centered is the perspective that couples a focus on individuals learners, their heredity, experiences, perspectives, backgrounds, talents, interests, capacities, and needs. With the focus on learning, the best available knowledge about learning and how it occurs, and about teaching practices that are most. Student-centered learning, also known as learner-centered education, broadly encompasses method of teaching and shift the focus of instruction from the teacher to the students. Student-centered instructions focuses on the skills and practices that enable lifelong learning and independent problem solving. Learner-centered education helps the students develop skills that will better equip them for their professional career. Teachers can be trained in this approach so they can apply the principles and provide their students with a better learning experience. The other is principles of interest and motivation. Interest. What is interest? Interest is a powerful motivational process that energizes learning, guides academic and career trajectories, and is essential to academic success. Interest is both a psychological state of attention and effect toward a particular object or topic, and an enduring predispositions to encourage over time. Learning resources must be interesting, attention catching, motivating for the learners for getting fully absorbed in learning. So, basic principles of motivation exist that are applicable to learning in any situation. Like the environment can be used to focus the students' attention on what needs to be learned. Teachers who create warm and accepting yet business like atmospheres will promote persistent effort and favorable attitudes toward learning. The environment can be used to focus the students' attention on what needs to be learned. So, teachers who create warm and accepting yet business like atmospheres will promote persistent effort and favorable attitudes toward learning. So, this strategy will be successful in children and in adults. Interesting visual aids such as booklets, posters, or practice equipments motivate learners by capturing their attentions and curiosity. Now, there are some incentive motivates learning. Like incentive includes privileges and receiving praise from the instructor. The instructor determines the incentives that are likely to motivate an individual at a particular time. In a journal learning situation, self-motivation without toward will not succeed. Students must find satisfaction in learning based on the understanding that the goals are useful to them, or less commonly based on the pure enjoyment of exploring new things. So, internal motivation is longer lasting and more self directive than the external motivation, which must be repeatedly reinforced by praise and concrete reward. Some individuals, particularly children of certain ages and some adults, have little capacity for internal motivation and must be guided and reinforced constantly. The use of incentive is based on the principle that learning occurs more effectively when the students experiences feeling of satisfaction. Caution should be exercised in using external rewards when they are not absolutely necessary. So their use may be followed by a decline in an internal motivation. Then principles of educational value. Learning resources should recreate or provide variety in teaching learning situation. They should not be employed for the name sake. Develop dependent and independent lifelong learning strategies, nurture their aspirations, confidence, curiosity, imagination, self respect, and responsibility to others. Explore and adapt to new ideas in both work and areas. And if we talk about the values and principles, then values are beliefs, attitudes, and opinions that people hold regarding specific issues. They are standards of behavior about what is important in life. Integrity, kindness, compassion, and honesty are the examples of commonly held values. Principles are quite different, so how do you use it? But I promise you that this, according to Civic Code, value education is the aggregate of all the process by means of which a person develop abilities, attitudes, and other forms of behavior of the positive values in the society in which he lives. About the principle of realization of objectives. Learning resources must be capable and meaningful for the proper realization of the teaching learning objectives. The realization principle is the concept that revenue can only be recognized once the underlying goods and services associated with the revenue have been delivered or rendered respectively. So this revenue can only be recognized after it has been earned. Then the next principle is principle of simplicity. The principle of simplicity or parsimony, broadly the idea that simpler explanations of observations should be preferred to more complex ones, is conventionally attributed to Williams of Ockham, after whom it is traditionally referred as Occam's razor. So simplicity is a state or quality of being simple, sometimes or something easy to understand or explain seems simple. In contrast to something complicated, religions also reflect on simplicity with concept that as divine simplicity. Simple designs tends to be more aesthetically pleasing. Simplicity is more accessible. It helps us to get things done faster, more easily, and more efficiently. So simplicity leads to less needs for instruction and support. Learning resources should be simple enough so that the students can understand it and enhance their learning. Then the other principle is principle of relevancy and suitability. Relevance. What is relevance? Relevance is the concept of one topic being connected to another topic in a way that makes it useful to consider the second topic when considering the first. The concept of relevance is studied in many different fields, including cognitive sciences, logic, and library and informative science. So, most fundamentally, however, it is studied in epistemology. Relevant, suitable, and appropriate learning sources makes topic easy to understand for the students. It serves the purpose of teaching in most effective manner. Then the next principle is principle of accuracy. The accuracy principles state that controls and processors should make reasonable efforts to ensure personal data is accurate. They must allow citizens to challenge the accuracy of data and take steps to rectify or erase the data associated with the challenge. In practice, this means that you must take reasonable steps to ensure the accuracy of any personal data, ensure that the source and status of personal data is clear, carefully consider any challenges to the accuracy of information, and consider whether it is necessary to periodically update the information. This principle states that Learning resources should be accurate and properly maintained in order to provide better learning. Then the other principle is principle of size. Learning sources should be prepared considering size of a class. It should serve whole class. It should not be too small, neither too big. The other principle is principle of availability of resources, like things to be considered within while selecting learning sources. What are those things? Like financial budgets. We should have trained teachers and ability and skills in the teachers to handle aid material. The other principle is principle of means to an end. Means learning sources are made to help teachers in order to provide better learning, not to treat end means in themselves. Then the other principle is next principle is principle of utilization. Utility decides the value of things possessed by us. A teacher should optimally utilize these resources. So there are some following principles to give direction. What are those principles? The first is principles of preparation, like things to be kept in mind, that awareness of the nature of learning sources and way to use it, consultation of different resources like information bulletin, instruction book, etc. Check interest and attitude of students. Clear objectives before teaching. Another principle is principle of physical control, like need to physical control is required in order to safeguard learning sources, provide economy of time, labor and money, generate and cause optimum teaching learning conditions. And the third principle is principle of proper presentation, like things to be kept in mind. What are the things? Careful plan and visualization of learning sources. Then we should know the techniques of the showman. Then we should take care for maximum utilization of the resources and minimization of the errors or no errors. Then principle of action is there, like teacher should instruct to remain quite alert and attentive while listening or observing the displayed resources. Then encouragement to respond actively and utilize experiences effectively, efficiently. Next principle is principle of appraisal, like evaluation of material aids. To what extent has it helped the teachers in the teaching task? How much has it contributed to make classroom environment healthy? And what are the difficulties that were encountered by? Then there are some limitations of the learning sources, like differences to students. More learning sources may not satisfy the curiosity of all students at a time. And visual differences are ignored using concept of teaching with learning sources. And apathy of the teachers. Teachers' view do not match on the concept of teaching using learning sources. And teachers may feel uncomfortable and wastage of time and energy for preparing and delivering lecture using ends. Then ineffectiveness of the aid, like learning resources may be considered as ineffective on the following grounds, like money and time, evaluation aspect, follow-up criteria, and then financial difficulties are there, like learning sources loses its value if they differ in input and output. Input means finance needed to prepare it, output means results in the form of learning. So dear student, this was all about this lecture. Thank you very much for being with me. Stay blessed. Allah Hafiz.